Bitwig 4.2 is aloof, and we will explore its features.
What's good, everybody? My name is Alckemy. Welcome to the channel. I am super excited to go over Bitwig's newest 4.2 features with you. We're going to be talking about the MIDI Grid briefly, because that's not really my forte, although it's got some really cool stuff in it. What I'm really excited about are the new chorus, phaser, and flanger effect plugins, and then we've also got a couple of neat little additions that we can explore. So it's not going to be the most comprehensive thing, but we're going to be talking about the biggest features. I'm really excited. Make sure you subscribe to the channel and check out my latest sample pack that is available on my website right there in the description. All right, let's get started. So I've got a quick demo tune. Let's go ahead and take a quick listen to it. Sorry for the cracking, by the way. My CPU is not really happy with recording and playing all these instruments at the same time. So I'm actually going to turn all of these off, and let's go ahead and talk about the MIDI Grid. Now, the MIDI Grid is pretty much the same grid atmosphere within Bitwig that was introduced within 3.0, but the difference is that it's focused primarily on being able to send out different MIDI signals to your synthesizers. Now, the reason why this is significant is because if you use the regular grid, you can have or utilize the oscillators or the sounds that come within the environment itself. But this is the next step in introducing the ability to kind of send any kind of MIDI data into any kind of sound, regardless of what synthesizer it's in. Meaning that you can switch up, your phase plant patches, and you can essentially create an entire ensemble or make drums with this, or all different kinds of things. It's purely based off of triggering MIDI and creating interesting patterns in that way. Okay, so this is the MIDI Grid, and it is pretty much just an input and an output that dictates all of the MIDI controls that we have. So this is actually just the data of an input signal. This is the pitch, this is the velocity, this is a MIDI controller, and then this other stuff on the extra, which you can find by clicking on this little guy, is the MPE controls. And what you kind of want to think about is separating the idea of MIDI and pitch into two separate things. So one thing is going to actually control an input signal, and then the other one is going to control the pitch that you can use independently. So it's really cool because it allows a finer means of control. And then if you want to have like multiple instruments and send them out to different channels, then you can just, in the same patch, grab another input and output that you can send out again to different means. And this is great because it means that you can have just tons and tons of layered instruments and sequencers and stuff that will give you like an entire suite of sound. You can essentially create an entire tune in this if you really wanted to, although that would be a lot. So in essence, you pretty much kind of want to align things that are color coded along with this, and that's why it's so great, because if you see everything that's in yellow, it means that you'll probably place it on the trigger. If you see things that are in orange, then that means that it'll probably change the pitch. And then there's other utilities and stuff that you can work with as well that will kind of help change and shift all this. For example, if you were to throw the steps on this into maybe say the timbre, then you can kind of change this over time. It can help bring out a more immersive expression that is going to help make things seem a little bit more alive. Within all this, this is just a huge rabbit hole, and I kind of just want to make sure that everybody is aware of it. There's a lot of tutorials out there. Go check out Polarity, go watch the intro for the Bitwig 4.2, but this thing is a huge game changer, especially for people that love to work in MIDI. And then of course, if I wanted to, I could always just change up the patch into something different, or just change the synth, or have it run into multiple synths. The other thing that I think is really interesting about this is that you can combine them with other note effects. Say if you have a more simplified note grid, kind of like this, and then you combine this with an arpeggiator, then you can get kind of a different means of a performance. So the other crazy thing about this is that you can actually grab a note selector, toss these into here, and have them toggle between each other and have different stuff lined up to make an even more crazy experience. So if I wanted this to be up top, where if I select this one, it's going to have the first patch, then I can actually grab an LFO or something, maybe like this, and have them select between the two, maybe every bar or so, to where I hit down, and now every bar, this is going to trigger a new kind of like experience or a new kind of performance. So cool, man. Lots of stuff that you can do with this. Okay, so I do love the MIDI grid, and I think that it's going to be really amazing, but the big thing that I want to talk about is none other than these guys, because they are incredibly awesome sounding, and they're not really too complex. They're just different kinds of analog style chorus, phaser, and flanger, but man, do they sound really good. So I'm going to just kind of play something very basic, which is, this doesn't look basic, but it sounds like this. And we can kind of use this to experiment with some of the new effects that we have. And these are different circuit types for the chorus in particular, but the control that you have here will give you some vastly different results. And I'm telling you, for Neurobass guys, this, you definitely don't want to miss out on this. So let's go ahead and listen to some of this stuff. Super cool, man. This stuff sounds amazing, especially when you start stacking this into other effects. This gets really crazy. So I'm going to turn the detuning back up, and then we're going to play through this again, but with some of the effects on here. Oh my gosh, this is so sick, especially with this stuff available at alckemy.com, whatever. But if you have any means of like creating Neurobass and you use it on this kind of stuff, like this is, I wish that these effects were in phase plan now, because this is so good. And I'm kind of just toggling through the different modes that are on here, but even just for the chorus, like this sounds so cool. Awesome. Okay, let's go ahead and move on to the phaser. So we're going to cycle through some of these, and I'm going to turn this back off to simplify the sound. Now the cool thing about this is that if you look over to the left, it actually has a lot of different modes that you can choose from, which is phaser, speaking, which actually kind of changes it into more of a formant filter, and then you have barber up and down. The speaking one in particular is awesome. So not only do you have the ability to change the modulation curves of like kind of how the phaser moves, but also the 4 different types on here will give you some very different results. And you can also flip the phase, which will matter as well. So let's go ahead and demo some of those. Wow. We also have the EHX, and I don't know what any of these mean, but they're just different selections to choose from. I think people that are into tipper type basses are going to love this. Super cool. Okay, let's look at the next one. This one in particular I actually really like, because this would be the most useful for me for like monster kinds of sounds. It sounds really good when you start turning on these other filters, and we'll demo that in just a second, but let's keep going. Man, this sounds so cool. Okay, so let's go ahead and turn this filter rack back on and let's see what this sounds like with the combined effects. Man, this is so cool. All right, so let's go ahead and talk about the flanger quickly, and we'll kind of run through that as it also has a couple of interesting modes. This has 4 different circuitry types, and then over here you have an added dirt option, which I usually end up turning on. So let's go ahead and take a listen to this quickly. This is so cool. It's almost like a resonator, but it doesn't have as wide of a frequency range that you can place in, but you can easily mess with this with a frequency shifter added on top of it. This one is super clean. Man, the monster sounds that you get from this are absolutely incredible. And messing around with these all together and messing around with the mixes and stuff will give you some really interesting results. So this is the most extreme case, of course, but you all know that I love to break sound, and you can definitely use this in more conventional means on more simple sounds. But at the same time, this is the stuff that I would use this for, and that's why I'm so excited about it, because a lot of times within the phaser chorus flanger aspect of it, they're all pretty much kind of like comb filters, right? But having the different circuitry types built into them, or the analog types rather, mean that they're going to behave differently. So not all choruses are built the same, not all flangers, phasers, whatever. Now, one thing I will say is that I left the low end alone on these, and these are all on the high end, 125 hertz and above. So if you're trying to get a similar sound and you've got a different setup, or you have like the Eternum pack or whatever, then you can get stuff kind of in the same means of that. The only thing I think that would be more interesting is if you could actually set this to be static and rotate the phase on your own, but that's really not something that I would complain about in particular, because you can always kind of bounce this out in audio and then throw it into a sampler. But you can see from playing on all these different effects that there's a lot to get into here, even though these effects are seemingly simple. I would definitely encourage you guys to experiment on your own and throw all different kinds of sounds into it. But for me in particular, this is really cool. And I'm super happy to have something like that, as I think one of the biggest areas that Bitwig can improve on are their effects. So the next thing that we have is a much more simplified thing. It is a new module within the grid itself, not to be confused with the MIDI grid. But if you pull up maybe like an effects grid or something, we have a new distortion unit, which is a hard clipper. It's cool, and it definitely works, and it sounds really good. However, it's not something that you can use at the end of your effects chain in order to keep your signal from peaking. There's a new anti-alias mode built into all the distortion types, which just basically means that you're not gonna have to deal with like Nyquist frequencies and stuff and all that, whatever, but it'll pretty much keep your sound cleaner, even though you were distorting it. Long story, go watch Dan Rowell for it. He'll be able to explain it in a much more elegant way than I can. But within this and these distortion types, you can pretty much clip this and get a really nice signal. You can see that it really makes it loud though, so you want to be careful and add a limiter toward the end whenever you use something like that. And even though we technically have clipping built on the outside of this, none of the clipping stuff, whether it be the saturator or whatever, is actually going to clip the signal, except for one thing that is kind of a sleeper hit, which is actually the 8-bit. This will actually keep your signal from going over the top, provided that you keep everything off in this way, and you turn this down, go to the shape, and then clip this, and you'll actually see that the signal will try to keep itself from pushing over the limit. So if we take a listen to this, this was previously hitting at plus 8.2 dB. Now let's take a listen to this. Now we just reduce this by almost 6 dB. So this actually will help tame your signal if you need to, although I don't think it's the most elegant solution. It does work. I just kind of wanted you all to be mindful of that because that was something that I learned in particular. Speaking of the other thing that I learned, we now have a mini view of the oscilloscope. And this is just something that you can use if you want to be able to kind of have some real estate saved within this. Over on the left, we have the wide and mini view, and it's cool that we also have the new inspector controls, which are pretty much the same as from before, but it's just moved over now. I'm not really sure how I feel about that, but whatever, it's the same, it works, so I won't complain. But within the mini view, it's kind of just like a pushed in viewpoint of this that will help us figure out what's going on with their signal. Now, the other cool thing about this, however, is that, and I didn't know this, but if we open this up to the big view and then we come over here, we can actually pin this on top so that way it's always somewhere in sight. So if we have a spectrum control or something else, you can do that as well. But if you pin this and you keep it here, then no matter if you click on a different signal or not, we can actually pin this to the top and keep it up front. And I didn't actually know this, and this is actually incredibly essential, and it would actually be great to use something like this on your master channel, say like a spectrum or something, to be like, oh, well, what's actually happening within my entire signal, especially in the mixing process. So that's pretty much a wrap of what the biggest changes about this are, and there's a couple of small bug fixes and, you know, some little nicks and knacks. But let me know your thoughts. Do you guys think that the new Bitwig features are definitely worth upgrading for, or is it something that you're on the fence about? Or maybe it's just not worth it to you to be like, hey, I'm not ready to upgrade yet. I definitely would like to see skins and themes. I definitely would like to see the ability to modulate inspector controls or some new synthesizers or just more effects in general, because I think that they're pretty great. I think, and I'm hoping that the next thing that we look at are some kind of clipping solution and then some kind of variation of distortion, maybe a wave shaper or so. That would be super awesome. But yeah, let me know your thoughts, and thank you so much for watching. Thank you to Bitwig, and I will see you all in the next one.